Alrighty, it is
Did you see the
1:15.
message?
Yeah, yeah, I'll check it. Welcome back to the Center for Inclusive Design and Engineering's Conference for Assistive Technology and Education. It is sponsored and co-hosted by the Colorado Department of Education's SWAAC program. Before we get started with SWAAC 101, AT, and the IEP, please just remember some of the tools you can use through the Whova app, especially rating your sessions at the end, providing that session feedback. These sessions have been enabled for closed captions. To see the captions, individual participants must click the CC icon located in the meeting controls toolbar. Another reminder is you can pop questions into the chat or unmute. This is an interactive presentation, so please pop in. We do have two links, one that is incorrect, but it looks like Sarah copied over the other one, both to a handout as well as a big resource folder that they'll be referencing throughout. So you can see that in the chat as well as accessed on this front page. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Michelle, Robin, Sarah, and Sherry. Thanks for being here today, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you for helping. Sarah, do I need to refresh this then really quick? Is that link incorrect on the?
It was working for me when I just tried it again. So I'm not
Okay.
sure what happened there, but the correct one is in the chat to access the questions, and I'll drop in the resource folder again. I don't know what happened there.
Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us. And I hope that you are interested in hearing us talk about AT on the IEP. And we're hoping that this can be somewhat of a discussion. I know with a group this size, it's kind of hard. So feel free to use those different resources that we have. You can use the chat, you can unmute yourself, join the conversation. We have some great questions that people submitted ahead of time through the poll. So we're just going to try to have an open discussion as much as we can. Colorado is a local control state, so you will see there are 4 of us with a lot of experience doing this who have different opinions about how to do this, and that's partly just because of the nature of how our state governs education. So join that conversation, share your own opinions. We just want to have a good conversation about this for everyone. So like Sarah said, there's some links here to access our handout as well as the resources folder. And they're also in the chat. I'm going to move to the next slide. Yeah, we're good. Okay. So these are our different districts that we work for. Just information about us. Here's our contact information, and I think I'll volunteer all of us that we would be willing to answer questions for you, talk about this more. I think this is a topic we all enjoy discussing with each other and with other people. So feel free to reach out if you have more questions after our presentation. And we represent a really different spectrum of schools. And so I work for a rural BOCES in the southwest corner of the state. And then the other 3 ladies are in much larger districts. And so I think we all kind of bring a different perspective in that way. So definitely reach out if you have any questions. Here are our learning objectives for today. And hopefully we will be able to do these, address these in addition to a lot of the questions that you submitted, and kind of, cover both of those at the same time. Okay. So should we get into it? Here, these 2 documents, these are available to you in that resource folder as well. These are recent publications talking about assistive technology specifically, which is kind of new. I mean, it was in some ways exciting because there's limited information that's kind of put out there at more of a national level around assistive technology. So these are definitely some important documents to consider. And I think, should we just jump right into answering that first question and kind of look at that document and how that connects? So we had a question in the poll what about appropriate evaluations? Who is doing those, when, where, DVR, helping in transition areas, you know, so, or transition ages. So that was a question that we received about evaluating for assistive technology. And we can use these documents to help look at what are some of those recommendations that OSEP made. So I'm gonna, should I just open this first link and we can look at that together? So yeah, this is just from January of this year. And there's a lot of information about assistive technology. And I think we'll reference back to this as well when we're talking about some of those nitty-gritty details of documenting assistive tech in the IEP. But there's some good information in here. And I think we were specifically talking about evaluation. So if we jump down to this section here, talking about an AT evaluation, must an AT evaluation be conducted prior to providing AT devices and service to a child with a disability? And the fact is that it can be included, but it is not required. So yeah, I'm curious to the other three of you, how do you handle this in your district? What do assistive technology evaluations look like? How do you document that in the IEP? Do other agencies help you with this? What happens?
That's a big question, Robin. I feel like
Yeah.
we have a pretty big group here that I feel like we as professionals, even if your school district does not have an assistive technology team, are providing AT supports to kids already. So you may not have an evaluation in quotes, right? And I feel like some of those more complex friends is where we might look sometimes at bringing in those specialists, but really it's the school team's responsibility to consider assistive technology. Because a lot of districts don't have what we have in Colorado too. There's, you know, it ranges from like a half-time person to a team of 7, right? So they're there to support. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I also think that it can get a little stickier when there's a formal request for an evaluation. So then that does put you into the timeline and the requirement for a special evaluation if there's a formalized written request for an assistive tech evaluation. At least in Aurora, that's the path we follow. Otherwise, I would agree with you, Sarah. I think we rely a lot on the school team and then our coaching from the AT team to support the school team.
Yeah.
And I agree. In Adams 12, we function very much the same. If there is a formal request for an evaluation, then it would be pulling in a variety of staff with that knowledge in different backgrounds. You know, the benefit to not having to do a full evaluation every time assistive technology is needed is that students are getting these tools in their hands much more quickly. So when we do a formal eval, it's trying to get people together, trying to get a report written, when often it's like, hey, let's just try this. So it doesn't have to be a formal evaluation.
Yeah,
And
I like what you go ahead.
Well, and I think we have to remember that AT needs to be considered during the development of every single IEP. So if we were required to do a formal evaluation for every single IEP, I'm not sure how a central AT team could handle that.
Yeah.
It would again then fall, like you talked about, Sarah, on the school team.
Right, and that's where that every team is required to consider it, and so it's not the sole responsibility of the AT specialist in your district. It's really that collaborative, what's best for that student, right?
And I always like to tell school teams, once you've exhausted the knowledge within your school team, you know, through the variety of people, your OT, your PT, your SLP, that's when they could seek out additional support from the district level AT team.
So we also, we have some links to some additional resources in that AT on the IEP poll questions document that is in our folder. So you can access those and look at that information as well, just for more information about this question. Are you guys good if I go back to our slides and move on to just talking about assistive technology as a golden thread? And then I think this again ties into some questions that we received. So one of the questions we received is, where should it go? Where should AT go in the IEP? And I think one thing that we all agree on is that it's not just one place. Really, a good documentation of assistive technology in an IEP should be in multiple places, because the assistive technology should be embedded throughout the student's day and activities, and it's really a means to an end, not a goal within itself. So we have a lot of different ways that it's supporting a student and that we're documenting that, but it's kind of embedded and woven in as a golden thread throughout the IEP, if it's a tool that really supports a student. So in my district, I've provided guidance that I want a lot of description around the assistive technology in that special factors. So there's definitely that specific question in the consideration of special factors, section 7, does a student need assistive technology, yes or no? And that needs to be a conversation at every team meeting, whether or not it is. That's like another question, but it should be. And they need to, if they say yes, provide a description of those devices and services that the student is receiving. And so that is one spot that you are required to consider at every IEP meeting. But then there are these other spots that really help flesh out that image of how the student is using this device, really answering all those WH questions, right? Like, where are they using it? How are they using it? What are they doing with it? And as an AT provider, really helpful to me to have that information about students. Anything else that you guys wanted to add about that?
I think one thing I like to bring up is I think the AT, the yes to AT or no to AT often just gets checked without really thinking about it. And so I like to remind teams that if you check no, you're basically saying in this legal document, yes, we discussed it, yes, we considered it, and we're saying no, this student does not require assistive technology. But what I see often is that assistive technology is noted or documented throughout the IEP and other places, and that's the place that it doesn't get documented. So it tends to get skipped over. And it's really important when we're talking about assessment accommodations and things like that, that it is specifically noted in that area.
Oh, and there's a good question that came in. Approximately how long is spent on this section during IEP meetings in minutes? I mean, I think in some ways it depends on your IEP software, right? If it's like a collapsible field that they're just like, oh yeah, we just said no to all of those things and move on, it could be a very short amount of time. Now, is that the appropriate thing to do? I wouldn't say it is, but.
And I think too, when you're thinking about IEP minutes, about talking about AT, if you're linking that golden thread, weaving it, we're going to go with that analogy, through the document, you're really talking about it throughout. So if Johnny's using word prediction, you're going to talk about it in the academic section. Maybe he has some articulation difficulties. Maybe the speech therapist is talking about that in her section. So really linking it all the way through the document is the most important thing, because then you're really going to be able to show that they have a need for it for school.
I think there's another important point too on our poll questions document, just talking about is when you document it in as many places as possible, it does help ensure that the student receives their required AT. I know that's something that we talk a lot about in terms of state testing. Sometimes if there's a contentious accommodation, the more places that it's documented, the better, because it really shows evidence that this is something that the student has used, is successful with, and needs access to.
So we have two new questions that just came through. One is from Whitney, and she just said, would you consider visual schedules, graphic organizers, core boards as AT? Yes, if we look at that definition of AT, we could go back to that document. You would be able to put that in there. If they're needing it to meet their academic and educational needs, yes.
As
Yeah,
long as
it's a
it's really
requirement. Yeah.
anything that's not surgically implanted is assistive technology. So as long as those core boards aren't surgically implanted in the student, it's assistive technology. There's that definition of what is considered AT is huge.
Do you want me to read the next one, or do we want to keep going through? We have one
I think
about.
we're gonna, so that we're talking about some of that, I think, later on with some of the other questions.
The one about PWN.
Yeah.
Okay. If we don't hit your question that you asked, come back to us. Does that sound good?
Okay, and then we talked about this already, just the importance of local control. It is different everywhere that you go. I'm trying to think, like, I'm trying to balance this between questions that we have. You know, these are some resources that are available to you. We were talking about. Let's look at how best to allow parent and student feedback about the AT plan and implementation. You know, actually, I think I should go back to that. If we're looking at the sections of the IEP, where would you want to include parent and student feedback? There are those specific sections in present levels, right, that talk about parent feedback, student feedback. So those are a natural place. Are there other places that you would document that?
Sometimes we will have teams put that in the PWM if it becomes part of the conversation at the IEP meeting. If it comes up new, then it can be something that we then discuss there that will add into the PWN. I think the most important part is to get it in there because they are part of the team.
Mm-hmm. And then I think, speaking of PWNs, that question, if you're evaluating a student, have you specifically put that, you will do that on the prior written notice?
If it's discussed in the meeting, yes. And speak to, you know, whatever your district is doing, or you're going to speak with your assistive technology team by this date. That's going to help families feel heard too, especially if we have that information in there.
And I think the other thing to keep in mind is that that section in consideration of special factors is devices and services. So it's not just a list of equipment. It can be a list of services, assistive technology services that the student is going to provide. So that could be a reevaluation of their use of this piece of equipment.
Is this also where we might talk about, you know, the difference between an evaluation versus consultation with the assistive technology team? You know, talking about that more formal evaluation versus, you know, the school team is going to reach out to this, you know, the district assistive tech team for some consultation.
Mm-hmm.
And I would definitely, whatever district you have or that you're in, you're going to have specific guidance from them. I know that the four of us have similar yet different processes and procedures in place. And so it may look different for your district. So that's another piece. Don't just listen to us, talk to that person, because they probably will have local control is huge. So.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to move on then to talk a little bit about this low tech versus high tech, because then I think this document could also be helpful in terms of some of that guidance around language and how we might specifically talk about specific pieces of equipment. So how to get funding, but leave options open for multiple mediums. You know, when we're looking at these different products, what can we do to describe what the student is using, but have options? And I think one of the biggest thing we can do is avoid using brand names in the IEP and describe instead what is working for that student. What about this product is supporting them? What features of it are they using? I did see an example in one of the presentations yesterday where someone talked about doing this kind of description and then having in parentheses currently using co-writer. I haven't done that in my district, but that is that was an approach that someone was using that I think does make sense. So there are some ways to talk about things and describe them that's not locking us into this one specific thing that the student has. I know that's helpful for me in a rural district because I might get students from a district that had a one-to-one program. We don't. So we need to scramble to try to put something together. We don't have read and write for Google in my district. So we might need to figure something else out. And so if I'm locked into this is the brand name, that's a problem for me.
And I do think we try to encourage our teams that if they want to note a brand name, they do that in the PLEP section. Like you said, this student is currently using Read and Write for Google Chrome, uses the features of speech to text and word prediction, and kind of elaborate on what they're currently using. But then when you get down to that AT box, it's really what they need is that feature, not necessarily that specific product.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so then we had a question in the chat about examples of the difference between what would you include in assistive technology devices and services versus unique communication needs. So that might be an example, Sherry, like what you just said of, you may be a little bit more specific when you're talking about the student's unique communication needs.
And I always, for unique communication needs, our guidance has always been to speak to what the student needs to be able to communicate both receptively and expressively. So if Johnny uses a speech generating device and also uses a low-tech board sometimes and uses his gestures, we might say Johnny's a multimodal communicator. He uses eye gaze, gestures, goes through the list, and then speak to he needs visual supports to help him with receptive language, and just talk there. It can be very like a little blurb. It doesn't have to be super lengthy there because you have that present levels. Hopefully that makes sense, Maggie. And then the specific devices.
For those of us in Colorado, CDE did come out with some guidance for what should go in the unique communication needs section. I don't think we have it linked in here. They did that several years ago. So for those of us here in this state, CDE has offered some guidance on that if you guys want to look that one up.
Yeah, I'll grab it here. And Maggie just asked, could you have one without the other? Yeah, you might have kids that, need support. They may have selective mutism or something like that, and they don't have an AAC device. Potentially that could be, you could talk about unique communication needs without checking the AT box, potentially, right?
Mm-hmm. So this question also talked about funding, which is kind of a separate topic a little bit. I mean, I think where it overlaps some is that, one, we're required to provide assistive technology at no cost to the family. And so then when it becomes documented in a legal document, like an IEP, there is that obligation to continue to provide that technology. Sometimes that can be used as leverage to kind of push a school in the direction of making a purchase or something like that. If you've really identified this is working for the student, we use the loan bank, we got it, it's great, we want it for the student. Sometimes having that documentation in the IEP is the evidence that you need to then pursue funding. But there's some other good links in there about funding, and I mean that could really be a whole presentation all by itself. So I think there are some information there, and again, that's something that if you have more questions about, we could help you with in a different setting for sure. And I think so there was another question, what do you write in accommodations? I think this same guidance is helpful for that. I think sometimes if a student has a really specific assistive technology needs, I will put assistive technology in the accommodations and say like see section 7 or see special factors for the more detailed description, just to save the time. Is that fair, you guys think?
It's funny because we did the exact opposite. So we put in, see assistive technology due to Johnny's difficulties with reading and writing, and then it says see AT accommodations in that section, and we're very specific there. So there you go. There's an example of how it's the same yet different in the districts.
I think it all comes down to making sure it's documented so the student gets what they need. You know,
I do think there's a huge push in our district currently, though, to make sure that accommodations are not that laundry list of items, and that it clearly states what is needed and what it's needed for, and it's specific and individualized for that student.
And I think there's also just that one little key piece that the consideration of special factors is talking about services to accommodations now. So it can be helpful if there is some kind of service tied to that assistive technology to make sure that that's documented in special factors when we're looking at what to document where. But honestly, I feel like they should match or refer to each other in some way. When they're not consistent with each other, that concerns me. I mean, it would be upsetting to me to see assistive technology very clearly documented in accommodations, and then does the student require assistive technology? No. Because that's just indicates to me they skipped that section. Yeah, so I think that it is important that there is somewhat of a mirror there or a reference to each other when we're talking about those two sections.
Robin, you mentioned service and how important that is. I know there was a question about, do you put minutes on an IEP for AT? That was one of the questions that came up.
Yeah, do you put specific time on schedule of services? I mean, I do not. This is one where we're very different. To me, that's going into that expert model. Like, you IEP team cannot provide this service. You need me, assistive tech person, to come in and do it for you. Great, that device is going to have an inch of dust between the times that I'm there. So it's just, to me, not an effective way. I see myself more in this role of empowering the team to be able to provide those services, and I will support them in whatever skills they need to gain in order to be able to do that. But I know that there are districts that operate differently. Are we all in the same boat where we don't put service time on the IEP?
We do not.
We do not.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I know that the SWAAC state level has always said we kind of follow that trainer of trainer kind of model, where we're there to support teachers and related service providers and families, not necessarily that direct service component. There are some people that do both, though, that they might be an AT person for half of the time, and they're the SLP in the building. So it looks different because of that local control. I also think my district, sometimes we will put specific things in under the service delivery statement for like training needs, but it's in collaboration with the school team. So it doesn't necessarily say that I have to be there to do it at all times, but that we're there supporting the team. We do that sometimes with more intense situations if we need to.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, there's definitely times when me as an OT, the service that I'm providing to a student is a little more assistive technology focused, just because that's my window that I look at the world through. And so those services that I'm providing as an OT are kind of AT services, but my AT coordinator hat is not on in those times. Okay, so then there was also a question about just universal built-in software supports ever placed in the IEP. And again, yeah, Michelle's nodding, yes, please, because just because they're universal in your district does not mean they're universal everywhere. And for those of us in rural areas or without one-to-one programs, we may not have those things universally. And it is a lift for us to go try to track something down that was just readily available in another school district. So anytime you can document is really important. And I think it's also important for just students' own self-advocacy to be aware of what they're using, why they're using it, what are those pieces of technology, even things that are built into the phone. I mean, we all grew up in the time where they're like, you're not going to have a dictionary in your pocket, you're not going to have a calculator in your pocket, and now we all do. So I feel like understanding, yeah, this word prediction on the iPhone helps me. and just being able to verbalize that is really important. So I think it is important that we talk about those universal tools.
And there's a comment in the chat about that, and Sarah responded to this too, about feeling like teachers are more likely to look at the accommodation section versus the special factor. And I think that's true. I also think when you print out the snapshot, the special factors doesn't come out in that snapshot, at least not in the ones that generally are handed out to classroom teachers in our district. So I think we need to remember, like we talked about, making sure it's documented across areas. So those classroom teachers also get that picture.
Yeah.
There was also a question about state assessment accommodations, state testing. I don't want that one to go by without addressing it. Robin, would you like
I saw it and was just yeah, state testing. I wish what we wrote in the IEP could inform what happens with state testing, but that's not always the case, is it?
I just want to take a moment and point out that the reason we all laughed about the state testing is that Robin is the biggest advocate to the SWAAAC group and to CDE for all of our students that need AT to access their academics. So that's why we threw that question straight to her.
I have some strong feelings about this. And it's hard. I feel very strongly that we should document what we would want to see as the students' appropriate accommodations during state testing. Whether or not the state decides to grant them that, we don't have control over, unfortunately. But I think we do the right thing by documenting what we think is right. And yes, those drop downs are limiting. I'm on the team that wrote the drop downs for at least the state enriched system. And so we were operating in some very specific guidelines and 100-character limit, which was challenging. And if you ever want to share opinions or advice, I'm open. Like, we're trying to make this work as best we can within a couple different limits. But there's other places within the IEP where you can document those accommodations. And even within that section, at least on the Frontline and Rich IEPs, there is some text boxes where you can go into some more detail about the students' accommodations beyond those drop downs. So I think it's just important that we document that, we have a conversation with families that we may not always get access to the accommodations we think are best for this student. I have to stop before I get myself in trouble. I hope that that's helpful. Should we talk about IEP goals? That's on the next slide. And then there was also a question about best way to write IEP goals. And I think, again, I am opinionated about this too. Maybe I should let one of you guys take the lead on this.
Hey, Robin, we did have somebody come in with a question about what if we're still in the process of trialing assistive tech with a student, i.e. speech recognition, when their IEP comes up. Should we mark yes under considerations of special factors? I wrote back to Caitlin and I said, it depends on your district. The guidance, what do you guys think before we go on to goals?
Okay. I mean, I think that puts you in a little bit of a legally precarious situation, right? If you're writing into the IEP, like, this is the thing that needs to be provided at no cost to the family, and we don't know that it works yet, that's a little bit of a risky situation to be in. So I think there are some other ways to maybe document what you're doing and that you're considering this and that you're working on it, but you haven't decided yet. And to me, that feels a little bit safer than committing yourself to a product that you don't know works. But again, you can use that AT box to describe the features that you think will be supportive to the student,
right,
without jumping
I think the PLEP, I think the present levels is a good place to note all of that.
I think too, a lot of times, if you're trialing dictation or something like that, most likely that student is probably using some other kind of AT tool, potentially. So are they using word prediction, or are they using something else that's a universal design of learning kind of tool that they may actually do have other things that are AT related that you would have to look at too. Because you potentially could check yes, potentially.
Well, and you could, especially if you're looking at something like speech recognition, where it does take some time to kind of build up some skills with that. Quite often, students initially have some skills just being able to use it to practice or generate ideas, or and so you can check yes in that situation for some specific situations as they're still expanding for maybe some other longer writing topics.
And I often, and maybe this is more of a question than a statement, but I wonder about checking yes, because the service is determining the assistive technology that they need. So by going through these trials, they are receiving assistive technology service through that process. Not, again, not direct service through an AT specialist, but the school team. So I think that's a really hard question, actually.
That's a
I've
good
used it
point.
in that way, Michelle. Like it to describe a service, the student is going to be receiving training in how to use this technology to determine if it benefits them. Yeah, for sure.
Hopefully that helped, Caitlin, and didn't make you more confused.
Put that as a star at the bottom of our whole presentation.
And that's why there's 4 of us here.
Yeah. Okay, ready? Should we talk about goals, IEP goals and assistive
Let's
technology?
do it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this statement is a good starting place. You know, the things that make my skin crawl is like student will be master the use of word prediction, or something like that, you know, where it's all about the assistive technology and not how the assistive technology is supporting the student. I feel like that's the trick with the goals. How is the AT helping the student reach their goal? The AT itself is not the goal.
And we've always said goals are, we're in the schools, goals are academically based, right? What does the student need to accomplish? But they might accomplish it in a variety of ways. So if it's word prediction or if it's completing written work, it could be with word prediction, it could be with paper pencil. There could be a variety of modes, but that goal is still completing that written work.
Yeah,
just
and so then
Go
the
ahead.
question that came in, what about when you have a higher level student who is learning to put vocabulary into their own device and modify their device for their subject area needs? Yeah, that's cool. What about that?
So like Sabrina, you're wondering about writing a goal.
Is that a goal?
For that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it could be. I mean, to me, it sounds like an independence goal.
Or vocabulary.
I was going to say a language goal for the SLP.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but
I
like
mean,
the act of putting it in isn't the goal itself. It's the vocabulary that they're going to be putting in that's the goal, right?
Yeah. So I think the language that's missing from your question is just that in order to in order to communicate at their job, or, you know, like what is this new setting that they're needing to add to the vocabulary for? Like, what are they doing with that new vocabulary that they're adding to their device?
So I'm thinking like on one of the assessments that we use, that the end goal is for them to be able to independently modify their device for their own needs. And so then I had a student who was in this situation where that was where she was at. And so then my goal for that student was not to choose what vocabulary she needed and teach her the vocabulary. My goal for her was to learn how to independently modify her device so that she could choose that vocabulary that she needed across subject areas. So for example, if she's in geography and it's plate tectonics and she doesn't want to have to put that word in, type that word in every time, she could have that key that has that word on it, but I'm not necessarily teaching her that vocabulary. That's where I'm wondering is in that case, wouldn't that be a goal that a goal for using her device to be able to do those modifications.
Like Stephanie said, like a self-advocacy goal, to manipulate their own device. I mean, technically, yes, I think you could potentially do that. I don't know the student specifically, but I think that goes back to some of the assessment pieces when we look at, like, I'm thinking about like the AAC profile, and that we can look at like operational competency, things like that, where they're going to be able to be like, oh, these are the next skills that they need to have to be able to be independent. So I think it's potentially, it could work for that situation.
Yeah, I think so too. Any tips on writing collaborative goals, such as PTs collaborating with an SLP? I've written a lot of OT collaboration with an SLP type goals where I was working on positioning to help a student be able to access their device. And so we were looking at like, what are those, what kind of support and things that we need to work on for the student to be able to hold their head up to use an eye gaze device, and what were some of those strengths, strategies, and things like that we were working towards. Do you have any other examples?
We did a lot with our PTs recently. We have a new PT crew that came into our district, and they similarly were doing a lot with the pieces around positioning for AAC within their rubrics, which was really nice. And we had a really great collaboration. And then the PTs were able to really understand what we were looking for the goals for being able to communicate versus, you know, their, you know, getting them in the stander and having them use their device then and things like that. So there was a lot there. I think it's a lot of collaboration and meeting with those professionals to be able to do those collaborative goals. Yeah, it's definitely, I do also have some OTs that I work with that do a lot with some of we have Google Read and Write in our district. And so a lot with helping to figure out how to get a kid to be really proficient with word prediction and accessing the keyboard and things like that.
I feel like sometimes too, what I'm bringing as the occupational therapist is kind of what we were just talking about in terms of like self-advocacy, or, you know, why would a student need to learn to do this thing on their assistive technology, and trying to look at that global educational perspective and maybe rewording that goal to say, you know, in order to be more independent and communicate more in their history class, they're going to learn to add this vocabulary to their device, and trying to just, you know, bring that sort of global look at the environment that I have as an occupational therapist into some of those goals that might be a little more focused on the assistive technology itself. Michelle and I also did a really fun session together last year at Kate, where we talked about, what do we call it? Now I can't, the fun stuff?
The fun stuff, yeah.
Yeah, and just kind of PE and music, and how you can incorporate assistive technology into those things and the importance of that. And I think that's also something that collaborative teams can really thrive when we're looking at incorporating assistive technology into specials or recess time or that unstructured time. Because again, as an OT, leisure is a life skill, so it's important. Okay, I'm looking through the rest of our questions. Should you mark yes to AT special factors if it is a low-tech assistive technology that is listed in accommodations? Yes. As long as it's not surgically implanted. And then that kind of ties into what must be documented legally at the bare minimum and why.
There's that great book that we all read a couple years ago. That is an LRP book. I'll put it in our resources document if anyone wants to read that. It is heavy in case law and things like that, but it does give a lot of nice information about if you have specific questions about if a student has glasses. Is that considered assistive technology? Things like that. If that would be helpful for you guys, we can put that in there as well.
That's actually a really interesting resource. I'm glad you brought that up, Sarah, because it really offers not only some feedback on thoughts on assistive tech, but the case law that backs it up. That is really important as we're all potentially seeing more and more some of those concerns come up.
And I think, like we said in this document, at the very, very bare minimum, you need to consider assistive technology in every IEP meeting. And that is the legal requirement. So that checkbox in special factors is supposed to be the documentation that conversation happened. Okay, and then the last question I have on our poll questions is, do you have any tips for adding AT consults? And I'm not quite sure how to interpret that.
Is that about in services, in the service delivery
Maybe.
section?
Yeah, I don't know.
Who added that question? Did anybody here add that question? If you want to elaborate for us.
Do you think, did we get to everything that's in the chat as well? It was moving fast for a while and I kind of lost my spot.
I think we covered everything in the chat. If we missed it, let us know. I think the documenting like a consult in the IEP, I think would be similar to, because it's a lot of trial, that it would be within present levels again. If you're having someone come out to help you consider, again, it's always about considering that component of AT for us. Did that answer that at all? Whoever that was that asked it.
Oh, well, and I wonder, that does kind of tie into something that we have linked here that we all worked on as well, which is the SWAAAC consideration guide. So that was a tool to help teams a little bit more through that consideration process and what that might look like. Just giving a little additional guidance to that conversation. And so that's linked here in the resources in our slideshow. And that's also in that folder where this lives. So there's a lot of resources available to you here in terms of just different tools you might want to consider. Oh, okay. I did not add it, but I do, as a service provider, put in service time to consult with my team to program the device when needed. That could be, yeah. If you're providing some services. I mean, I often joke that I'm on the IEP team's IEP, not the kids' IEP. And so, those services might not be documented there, but, I have. And that's where I have used, not for a long time, but in the past when we had some litigious situations going on, the implementation plan that I have linked here was helpful. That was kind of an above the table guide that we were using of who was responsible for what, when is it going to get done by, how will we know that it's done, just a kind of guidance document to assure everyone on the team that we were working towards this goal that for the student to use assistive technology. So I have found something like that helpful when in a more spicy situation. Okay. So yeah, there are several resources also linked here. We have some example text and different ways that you might be able to talk about something without using a brand name available to you as well. And yeah, we have a few more minutes. If anybody else has questions or if we can help clarify anything that we didn't describe very well or whatever, we'd love to help. Usually add operational competency goals under a goal for communication supports for pair strategies. Yeah. I mean, I think that is an important thing with all assistive technology, is making sure that students are involved in the process, right? Like that they know what they're using and why they're using it and what it's called and how to get to it. And especially any of those kids that are looking at post-secondary education, they're going to move into that position of needing to be their own advocate. And it's really helpful if they're familiar with what they're using and why. Have you all listed tech supports that are UDL as assistive technology? Yeah, I mean, I would consider like a graphic organizer UDL. I've listed that as assistive technology for a student who really needed those.
Well, and I think about you know, now it's getting more and more popular, but years ago, speech to text, text to speech may not have been available on that device that the student was using, and some districts still don't have access to a lot of that. So I definitely suggest putting, you know, UDL supports potentially in, especially if they need it for testing. It may be built into their computer, but our lovely testing system, it may not be.
And I think you want to write the IEP like someone outside of your district is going to read it and understand it. So to really show what that student needs.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then this said, if AT is yes, is UCN, is that unique communication needs always also a yes? And I would say no, because there's a lot of assistive technology that doesn't really have anything to do with communication. And so there may be students that need, you know, visual supports because they have a visual impairment or a hearing impairment or motor impairment that would need assistive technology that doesn't affect their communication. But I think that there was a guide, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, at some point to help increase the number of those that we were writing for students that were using AAC.
Yes, I shared that in the thread. Let me find it and I'll put it back up at the top.
Yeah. Yeah, unique communication needs. I mean, I think it's for kids who use AAC, it is good to have. Do you have examples of an AT support request form? Ooh,
I sure do.
I do too. Yeah.
You want to send us an email and we can send it to you? We have it in Google Docs already set up for you.
Oh no, that link says page not found.
Uh-oh, is it Douglas County's?
the
And we
CDC one.
use a Google Doc for request for support.
Mm-hmm.
My district does as well.
You can find it on our webpage. You can access the pretty much the whole document. I can share our webpage with you guys too.
Mm-hmm.
And I know for my district, we try to keep that request pretty simple and easy, because if we find people will not complete it if it's too complicated. And so it's kind of that first touch point with us, and then we can go in and ask more questions because we find they just won't fill it out.
Ours is
Agreed.
very simple too. Ours also sort of follows
5
the SWAAAC
questions.
framework. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then, you know, if you get really fun, you can do some cool like Google add-ons in the back end that'll automate sending you what they fill out and do some of those fun things.
Well, we have it, and if you want help with that, happy to help, Erin.
Yeah.
Any other questions for us? We've got a couple minutes.
Was there, and I feel bad too, because I felt like I was cutting you guys off sometimes because I was like, I'm worried about time, so I don't want us to spend too long on one topic. But if there's anything we need to go back to, we could as well. I mean, I know we kind of just like jumped right into that OSEP stuff really quickly, so.
Abby, it looks like Abby found the correct link to the CDE Unique
Oh,
Communications
thank you.
need.
Yeah, I think the
And
links
attached
had
it.
been cut off, so I think that's the right one.
I am not winning today on the link setup, you guys. Thank you for fixing that, Abby.
And I think if we're talking about that OSAP document and the myths, I know for my district, we have a weekly update, and I've been taking one myth a week and putting it out in our weekly update just to help, it's a big document. So to kind of break it down. And
I love
it's,
that idea, Michelle. That's great.
yeah, and they're a little bit long. So I've dropped them into Chat GPT to shorten them. So it's easier to put in the newsletter.
Look at you, so fancy. Yeah, that's great.
And the just for clarification, for those of you that haven't looked at the myths and facts document from OSEP and from the US Department of Ed, it's all AT encompassing. So not just related to AT and the IEP, but it really goes over many different concerns as it relates to assistive tech. And so I would highly recommend, if you work with assistive tech in the schools, you would take a look at it.
And personally, I feel like a lot of it is informed from these quiet guides, which are older. They've been around for a while, but they're written in a rubric form, which I think a lot of us really relate to because we spend a lot of time with those. So that's also something I would really recommend looking at if you're new to assistive technology. And they have a lot of different ones for different assistive technology practitioners or people in different places in education. And I find them very helpful. I refer back to them quite a bit. And I think those two documents, the OSEP guidelines and these really tie well together.
Anyone else? It's second day, heading towards the end of the.
I know.
It's hard. We're not used to sitting.
Mhm.
Thank
And
you
I
for
will say,
joining
though,
us, everybody.
I appreciate everyone that sent questions in. I think that really guided our conversation and hopefully really met your needs for coming to this, because we didn't want to just like throw a lot of information at you. We really wanted to know what you needed from us.
Okay. Sabrina, I'm trying to understand your question here. I'm an assistive technology user myself. And so sometimes I can't, it's harder to use on Zoom, and I have, like, it takes me a minute.
So
to
I'm just trying to clarify, because you all talked about putting or not putting the specific device in there, but under current levels, I understood that you could put it there because they're currently using this device with this word program on it, those sort of things. And then under the accommodations, we don't put that. We put, they need this type of accommodation for this purpose.
You're right, Sabrina. So it's,
Use of a speech generating device or.
you got it.
something like
Yep.
that. Okay.
Yep. And then you can always go to the DCSD AT flow chart that we have in our resources. We'll give you what our district, Sabrina's with me here in Douglas, what we would suggest to put under the consideration information and then in the accommodation. And we're happy to help you. A lot of times people will be like personally owned use, personally owned Nova Chat or something like that in the present levels, or use of a Douglas County SWAAAC loaner iPad with such and such vocabulary. That's kind of where we're at. And I think other districts do similar things. But if you have other questions, I can chat with you about it more.
I think that's what I was doing, but I wanted to be sure because I wasn't sure after the conversation that went back and forth if I was not allowed to do that now.
No, you are. Don't you worry. Again, it's that local control component that it gets so confusing. You're doing it great, Sabrina.
There's no rules, only
I don't know
guidelines.
about that. Sometimes I forget, like, I'm so used to the kid using it that I forget to add that information. I'm like, oh, this is how they did on all their testing, and this is where we're at with all the goals. I'm like, oh, wait, I forgot to put in there about how we access that.
Yep, it happens.
Oh yeah, and then we had a question about SWAAC coordinator. Yeah, we're all SWAAC coordinators. You can reach out to one of us, all of us. There's also a list on the SWAAC website of the different SWAAC coordinators throughout the state if you want to find somebody nearby. But yeah, we all are happy to talk about SWAAC and assistive technology coordination and whatever else can help you. Okay, well, I think that's our time. But please reach out to us if you need anything, and I hope that this was helpful to maybe clear some of the muddy waters when it comes to documenting assistive tech in the IEP.